What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. You are now tuned in to the Relationship Theater. I'm your host, Cornell Dane. And tonight's show is going to be interesting, I think. I find it interesting. Um, let's talk a little bit about marriage. Marriage. It's a topic that I feel, at least, has been broached by the red pill community, has been broached by, I guess, the women. Maybe they're in the red pill community, but single women. I feel like there have been panels and people on stage that have discussed relationships and, what it takes and what is necessary. And they've, in some cases, taken questions from the crowd. And people are interested in trying to figure out this Rubik's Cube of relationship, marriage, life, etc. So, with marriage, I think many of us tend to overfocus and overemphasize I would say the limited the limited impact that the day of marriage, quote unquote, the ceremony, the day of when the vows are exchanged, when, your father gets to dance with, gets the first dance with the daughter, and the mother gets the first dance with the son, and there's the buffet or the food, and there's the band, and there's there's all of that, right? I think many of us get stuck on that. The fact that might be missing. Oh, I was never married. This never happened to me, right? But I argue that something's missing from that viewpoint. There are two things. One is, if you got married and never had children, you run the risk of that union. Of course it was sanctioned by the government, right? Of course you got your marriage certificate. But for all intents and purposes, that marriage, that union will be lost in the future. No one will remember it. However, the marriage, the one I argue is the real marriage, the one where you have children, you share children together, or you have children together. This is a union or an arrangement whereby, which, as long as the descendants of that union continue to proliferate into the future, not to say that you will always be remembered, but there will always be breadcrumbs that lead back. Those breadcrumbs are your descendants that will lead back to you and those that came before you, the antecedents, or the ancestors. But I've argued this before, that many of us who are claiming not to be married are missing the fact that because of certain decisions, certain decisions, many of us actually are married and we just don't know it. And not only are we married, we are bound and bonded to this person for not just our lives, but for all of eternity, or as long as they can keep records, right? Assuming that gets better. But think about it. I'll give you two scenarios. One in which I've actually lived through. But the first one would be the fact that somewhere in the far distant future, you have a descendant. And let's assume that the person that you've had a child with, you've never actually even lived with. You just, basically, the child that came out of this union was made up of just hot, heavy, summer 16-year-old sex, right? But a child came out of it. And that child had children whose children had children whose children had children whose children had children. And somewhere in between the summer of hot, heavy, young sex, the connection between you and this descendant was lost for whatever reason. In the distant future, maybe, this descendant moved somewhere. Maybe they lost contact with their parents. Maybe they were adopted or put up for adoption. Whatever it is, somehow they find a breadcrumb and they decide to find that connection back to the beginning of how it all may have began for them. And so they start a family tree. And in that family tree, whether you're married to the person you have the child with or not, it's going to show up almost, at least the way I've seen family trees. It's not always obvious that the mother and the father were not or were married. I mean, I think it's assumed that they were married. It's not always the truth, right? We found out, like in shows, that Henry Louis Gates show where celebrities come on and they're looking or searching or seeking to figure out their connection with the past and who their ancestors were. They happen to be that descendant that I'm speaking of, that may be your descendant in the future. But they go on, and only an expert who's able to really research the topic is able to tell them if the mother and the father of that union were actually married. Sometimes these are actual arrangements. I remember one time on that show where there was a gentleman who, he and his wife couldn't have children together. So the wife urged him, understanding that children was maybe something that was important to him, she urged him to go out and copulate with a young woman. And he did, with her blessing. And this was unknown until the detectives got working and they followed the breadcrumbs and they figured out who these people were at that particular juncture within the family tree. Now, there's another scenario. This one I've actually lived through, whereby if two people have a child together and that child gets married, right? No matter what, at some point, that man and that woman, no matter what their feelings are, they could hate each other's guts, but no matter what, at some point on that day where the vows are exchanged, right? Where the vows are exchanged, that man and that woman are going to have to stand shoulder to shoulder as husband and wife in a way, right? Because again, it's all optics. If someone doesn't explain it, the assumption is that this man and this woman who created this person are married. Now, that feeds into my other point. Like I said, my point is that many of you who haven't had the day of vows exchanged, the ceremony, the pomp and circumstance, the white dress, the cake, the garter being thrown over your shoulder, all that stuff, whatever. The people who haven't had that, some of you have children. And so in a way, even though you haven't had the day where you stood before God, in a weird way, you have had that day because the commitment and the bond that you have with this person because of the child, it is like the gift that keeps on giving. and it's irrevocable. You can't put the kid back in and Benjamin Button the kid back to non-existence. That child is evidence of the union that the two of you share. And so many of us who, I think I did a video on polygyny. I just haven't put it up, so I have to put this one up too. Make sure I put these up in order. But I did a video on polygyny, and it was referencing Dr. Umar Johnson's belief that polygyny is somehow vital to the economic renewal of Black people, right? And that's I'm getting off on a tangent on that. But within that video, what he talked about was that some of us are already polygynous, right? He is right in that way, in that sense. However, the way we understand that lifelong commitment by way of continued or perpetual sexual contact with which either of these women is different. Some people are getting away with having multiple partners at the same time. I understand that, but that's not exactly the same as what maybe some of us are experiencing who have children from previous unions, even though we may be in a new union now. But that new union, you may not even have children. And so in a strange way, the union that will be remembered most is the union with the person you had the child with. Moral of the story: be careful who you have children with. It's a lifelong commitment and bond. It is a form of marriage between two individuals. And if you don't know this person, or you're too young to know this person, you might be better off not being involved to that degree. Hey, feel free to comment as you see fit, and let me know your thoughts. Peace.